My dear, here we must run as fast as we can just to stay in place. And if you wish to go anywhere, you must run twice as fast as that.
Would you rather live life for long in all its misery, or live it well but have it slip away from you? This is a fundamental challenge with studying the experience of time, which is that once you start to understand it, you realize that these are pretty much your only choices. In other words, the better you are at handling life and the more enjoyment you get from it, the faster it will seem to pass by. Did you say something? Long-term planning is a privilege given to those whose lives present to them the certainties necessary for planning. In other words, the more predictable your environment, the longer into the future your ability to plan can reach. However, even if you were given the choice to live a good, well-planned life, free of any intolerable suffering, it isn't quite evident to me that that is a satisfying choice. The more enjoyment we get out of life, the quicker it'll seem to end. It's like binge watching a soon-to-become your favorite series and eventually finding yourself at the end of the day out of episodes to watch. But then the only way it could seem to last longer would be to start finding it confusing, difficult, or boring. Of course, you could say, well, let's try to savor it. We'll watch some now and then some more later, and then we can even rewatch it. And you'd be somewhat correct. That would be the flaw in my analogy. But as opposed to a TV series, you cannot pause your life or relive it. You either live it well and seemingly quicker, or poorly and seemingly slower. Of course, we're most of the time in between, where we all live episodes and seasons of varying degrees of satisfaction. But the trade-off between satisfaction and living a life being conscious of all its little moments is still there, it seems like. It's like living in a world where the hands of the clock spin faster when we're happy and slower when we're suffering, thereby in a sense aiming to maximize suffering and minimize pleasure, at least in the present moment. And it seems to be fundamentally cruel, though actually it also seems to be a powerful evolutionary tool. That is, to some extent, the more suffering we experience and the more limited pleasure is, the more motivated we'll be to achieve said pleasure. And since life was absolutely horrible for much of our evolutionary history, this mechanism effectively pushed us into building the world we live in today, which, for all its issues, does allow us to live at least twice as much and arguably more than twice as comfortably. And when laying it down like this, I am becoming more grateful for my own suffering, which is essentially this mechanism that sets me up to fight the crushing march of nature's disarray. But yet it's not enough. I have to somehow be genuinely content about it. Somehow I have to be okay with life effectively always going to end sooner than desired, and be okay with the fact that everything I know and love is going to be destroyed. So that was my thinking from a few months ago. Now I got a bit more in depth with this idea of time experience, and I realized that I was wrong in a technical sense. And I will try to explain the basics of it, because though I did briefly mention this in previous videos, it's far from clear what I mean by time experience and everything else. So let me properly introduce y'all to my model/theory. So it's called mind architecture. One of my professors actually called it that, and it essentially starts from the idea that existence is functionality, as I described it in the video about determinism. And in turn, the way we function in relation to reality is a continuous development towards stable and intercompatible conceptual structures, which means that we're always trying to perceive the world in consistent or similar ways, and that experience itself is something we construct for this exact reason, which is to make sense of the world and be able to adapt to it one way or another. And so we gradually develop primary ways of adapting to different sensations, situations, concepts, and whatnot. And in doing so, we effectively learn to experience the world in similar ways, which includes thinking and feeling the same across different situations. And this stability does tend to become synonymous with rigidity. You may simply get stuck in feeling miserable because that has become the most stable way you could experience the world. And as a side note here, this is partly what psychotherapy does to help. Because I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this, but there are many different schools of psychotherapy which use different techniques and approaches, but it turns out none of that really matters. What matters instead is the quality of the relationship between the psychotherapist and the client. And what that does technically is to force the client to adapt to a new kind of relationship, one that is potentially radically different from the world they knew beforehand, that is based on trust and honesty and authenticity and so on. And that is important because it effectively widens the client's worldview. It creates room for other ways of experiencing the world other than to perceive it as being this miserable and chaotic and dangerous place. But how is time related to all this? Well, the full answer, I have to break down into separate videos. And that's what I intend to do, because it not only requires an understanding of the model I'm describing, but also a remodeling of what you understand time perception to be. Which, let's begin now. Time perception is an experience. It's the experience of time, but it's not an experience of time in the physical sense, meaning you don't experience the seconds, minutes, hours, and whatnot, but your own capacity to adapt to whatever happens at that time. The better you are at adapting to the task at hand, the less your experience of time will be distorted in the sense of slowing it down. This type of experience is what I call present time. And there is the opposite phenomenon, which I call absent time, which is what you experience when you can't but are trying to adapt to whatever is happening. It's kind of a fundamental frustration, which is why the emotionality associated with absent time is overly negative. If you need a simple example to understand what absent time is, the one I use most often is that of what happens when you're in the process of finding what to think or say next. It's those moments when your mind is blank, essentially, when your experience kind of just breaks down, after which you're like, what am I doing? What was I saying? So you see, it's already kind of a lot of information, but getting across this idea would be good enough for this video. When you're able to adapt to the world one way or another, you are in present time mode. And when you can't, you are in absent time mode. When you're able to adapt and are in present time mode, you tend not to notice as much how much time is passing, like when you're binge watching something or doing whatever gets you in the flow. And when you're in absent time mode, you tend to exaggerate how much time is passing, sort of like hovering a magnifying glass over it. So this loops back to the beginning, actually, because the prospect seems to be, again, technically, that we're either unable to savor living a good, satisfying life because we'd be too busy living it, right, in present time, or we are going to be able to take notice of every passing second, but every passing second will be fundamentally torturous. Or will it? What about mindfulness? Yes, time does slip away faster than we're used to when we meditate successfully, but in itself, it's about awareness. It is about savoring the present moment. What if awareness itself is a type of activity that we can learn to adapt to and that allows for both enjoyment and the savoring of that enjoyment? And if that loophole isn't satisfying enough because you can't both meditate and dance or whatever, there's always this counter argument to my original proposition, actually, which is that fine, you can't slow down your experience of time and enjoy what you're doing, but you will still get old regardless, and you will still try to look back at your life. And while in the moment absent time with all its frustration does allow you to experience time as being slower, it also leaves nothing behind because you will have nothing to remember, while the opposite is true for present time. So the real question is, am I content with trading off immediate painful awareness for future memory enrichment, or would I rather suffer in the frustration of absent time, trapped in a never-ending loop of hopelessly trying to adapt, aware only of my inability to do so, and leave no memory behind?
Is my life going the right way?
What do you mean the right way?
I don't know, I'm just worrying that I make stupid choices.
I mean, do you have a plan or some goals in mind?
Goals. It just seems so far off and unlikely. I think I want some certainty.
Well, certainty is for the present and for what you put effort in. It's natural to doubt your future when you haven't put as much explicit effort into it. But you can get there.
But where do I start?
Well, ironically, you would start with your certainties. Try to look at what you do, what you feel, your relationships, values, and sort of project that into the future.
How do I do that?
Well, take our relationship, for example. Imagine how you'd want it to look like in the next 10 to 20 years. Yeah, and break that into smaller pieces. Where we'll live, what we'll eat, what we'll do, what else we'll need, and then break that further into more realistic options. Finally see what you can do in the present that brings you closer to all of that. Or at least see when you'll be able to do something about it.
And I can do that with everything else in my life?
Yeah, you can break stuff down like this, pretty much.
Wake up every day, I have some food and everything. Everything seems like it's going to be fine. Then all of a sudden, shit